Indiano, economista de formação, Pavan Sukhdev fez carreira no setor financeiro. Em 2008, resolve tirar uma licença do Deutsche Bank para liderar a iniciativa Economia Verde, encabeçada pelo Programa das Nações Unidas para o Meio Ambiente. O relatório TEB, The Economics of Ecosystems and Biodiversity, que avalia os benefícios econômicos mundiais da biodiversidade, fez avançar muito o debate sobre a economia e recursos naturais, criando a contabilidade do capital natural, que adiciona o valor das riquezas naturais aos tradicionais cálculos econômicos. Em 2012, Sukhdev avançou ainda mais na análise sobre o mundo dos negócios, com o seu livro Movimento Corporação 2020. Nele, o economista defende impostos mais elevados com base no impacto ambiental, para estimular nas atividades econômicas a inovação verde. O indiano esteve no Brasil em maio de 2013 para lançar a edição brasileira de seu livro, publicado pelo selo Planeta Sustentável da Editora Abril.
Pavan, no seu livro, você abre a discussão sobre uma grande lista de fatores, variáveis importantes para a criação da Corporação 2020 e algumas variáveis que dificultam o aparecimento dessa nova corporação. Como você vê uma ação mais focada num stakeholder estratégico como o investidor institucional, tipo os fundos de pensão e outros similares? Esse não pode ser um grande ponto de alavancagem?
Institutional investors hold an estimated 70% of stocks and bonds, and therefore they are clearly important in signaling what kind of assets they will hold. But what has happened over the last decades is that the signals that the institutional investor sends is still very much aligned to the old model, which is profit optimization, without any regard to what is happening to society. So the reward of private profits and the ignoring of public wealth and the impacts on public wealth actually is built into the performance metrics and built into the responses of investors. Investors are too tied up with the so-called 2s and 20s thinking, which is the 2% commission and 20% profit share that they make as trading portfolio managers. And that's not going to change simply by hoping that it changes. And a second aspect of this problem is that benchmarks for portfolios, investor portfolios, are existing portfolios. So if you are a portfolio holder which has done slightly better than actually an overall market which is collapsing, you are still rewarded because that's considered good performance. The reality is that if planetary boundaries are hit in succession, as is likely to happen over the next decade or two, then entire ranges of stocks in the energy sector, for example, the investments in fossil fuel-based industries, in the transportation sector, the investment in private cars and companies and manufacturers of cars, and investments in certain forms of agriculture will suffer tremendously. Stock values will be lost. But the challenge is here how to change investor perceptions, society's perceptions of what is a benchmark. The benchmark cannot be simply whatever the market is. The benchmark has to be a goal, an aim, a direction in which you wish to go. That kind of benchmarking, once again, is tied up to Corporation 2020, looking to increase shareholder value, but at the same time, increasing stakeholder value, increasing wealth for society.
Em que medida seria melhor controlar o risco de desgovernos da alavancagem financeira, que é capítulo que ele dedica ao livro? Seguir estritamente regras impostas ao jogo de negócios ou demonstrar autorregulação no processo de governança? As empresas fariam uma coisa ou outra?
Yes, financial leverage really has been a key driver of a lot of our problems today. Of the last 4 recessions, you can see that in fact they were all driven by either misuse of leverage or excessive leverage or misapplied leverage. whether it was the most recent derivatives in mortgage crisis, or whether it was the Asian debt crisis in 1998, or whether before that the savings and loans crisis in the US, or indeed whether before that the Latin American debt crisis. Leverage has played a critical role in those. Controlling leverage, however, is not merely about controlling the intermediary, the banking system. A lot of people think that if we just set the right capital requirements for bank, that's the answer. But actually, that hasn't worked during the last two crises and the last two recessions. So in fact, we should now be exploring how to set capital limits, capital maintenance limits, for the borrowers themselves who are expanding too much in their use of borrowed funds. We need to look at ways of controlling leverage in specific instances, such as mergers and acquisitions, when leverage does explode very often. We need to look at why historically we have favored debt over equity by making interest on bonds and loans exempt from tax, but not making dividends exempt. And finally, we have to look at incentives, rewarding traders and originators and corporate bankers and investment bankers with vast bonuses when there is an incentive for them to earn those bonuses by just pushing credit into the corporation, in fact, encouraging leverage to be higher and to be used more. So in a number of ways, rules and regulations and constraints need to be brought back so that this idea that somehow companies can just become too big to fail and then be bailed out by governments and then finally their losses paid for by taxpayers, that idea should come to a halt. It should not be possible for companies to become too big to fail and pass their problems on to governments and to society.
Bom, professor Pavan, a questão das externalidades influenciando a definição da competitividade tem sido muito discutida. Sabemos que se uma empresa ou um país incorpora as externalidades negativas nos seus preços, imediatamente os preços deles aumentam. Como é que fica a competição entre os países e entre os diferentes produtores? Como seria essa transição para um momento onde todos considerassem as externalidades nos seus preços, nos seus custos?
Sometimes first movers have an advantage. They might come out with new technologies, new techniques to save energy, to be energy efficient, to convert to different energy use, reduce materials use, avoid waste damages, and so on. So sometimes being the first mover can help, but very often being the first mover is a cost and a competitive cost because you have incurred investments which may or may not be recovered immediately. You have incurred costs which may or may not put you at an advantage against others. This is why introducing regulations at the country level may not necessarily work because, as they say, if you squeeze the sausage from one side, the meat just flows to the other. There are so many countries, and unless all of the countries where any particular industry is significant work together, work in unison, that does not necessarily give you the answer. So the focus here should be on getting industries together, which are the largest causers of externalities, whether it is coal-fired power or whether it is beef and cattle farming, for instance, here in Latin America, or whether it is cement or whether it is steel. Get the industries together as a group, a global group, and you will find that typically it's not more than 10 or 20 countries where those businesses are actually largely based. Even energy, primary energy, is largely 20-25 countries where it comes from. Focus on creating industry-wise solutions, agreed across the industry and supported by the presidents and the prime ministers of those 10 or 20 countries where those industries are based. That's the answer. One cannot keep chasing all 192 nations of the United Nations, and one certainly cannot rely on any one nation to fix everything in the hope that somehow everyone will follow.
Pavan, em seu livro você argumenta que o fim de 950 bilhões de dólares de subsídios à indústria de petróleo e gás seria uma forma de acelerar a destruição criativa de Schumpeter, onde o capitalismo renasceria de uma forma melhor. Se relaxássemos a destruição criativa de Schumpeter e pensarmos em algo como uma economia que tem um funcionamento próximo de evolução, o subsídio às empresas que são consideradas mais verdes não seria uma forma contra-intuitiva de ajudá-las, pois estaria criando um mar de empresas mais frágeis?
Look, I'm not against subsidies per se. But my problem with subsidies today is that today's subsidies are solving yesterday's problems. So we have $650 billion of subsidies for fossil fuels, $550 billion price subsidies, $100 billion production subsidies. And we have $275 billion of subsidies for agriculture, most of which tend to get used to provide cheaper chemicals-based pesticides and fertilizers, and so on. So we are actually supporting with our subsidies the brown economy. That's my problem with subsidies. And the answer is not just to, in a blind fashion, switch from one to the other, because frankly, there is a lot of the economy today that is tied up with and invested in this. What should be done is to announce a direction of change and achieve it over the next 7 to 10 years. The G20 nations should announce a direction of change, which is a complete elimination over 7 to 10 years of fossil fuel subsidies, an elimination of subsidies which are supporting chemical pesticides and chemical fertilizers, because we know their impacts on human health and on agricultural productivity, and so on. And at the same time, invest and, if you like, subsidize industries and research which is developing solutions for the future. Focus subsidies so that they solve tomorrow's problems, not yesterday's problems.